I'm Chance Storland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. And as always, now we did come back from a week off because Elizabeth Zavala had some much-deserved vacation, joined now by San Antonio Express News courts reporter Elizabeth Zavala. Great to have you back here on the program. Missed you the last week, Liz.
Yep, I missed being on the program, but, the courthouse kept going on, and as soon as I got back, we were able to get back to business.
That's right. I think we're going to talk about two cases today. One new one that we haven't discussed, and then an update on something that we've talked about a couple different times before. So let's begin with this case of Luis Antonio Arroyo.
Yes, he is 41 years old, and he was 39 when he was arrested in January of 2016 and charged in a bloody double slaying of two people at an apartment here in San Antonio. He is charged with capital murder, multiple persons, in the deaths of Rodney Spring and Quickitha Jackson, who we will refer to her as Keitha, which is what her mom calls her and what we have heard in court this week. And this is a death penalty case that Bexar County prosecutors are pursuing here against Mr. Arroyo. And what happened was that these were, the three were friends. Keitha Jackson, her mother, Tandalyn Jackson, and Arroyo were friends with a man named Rodney Spring. And Mr. Spring and the two Miss Jacksons had been friends for a really long time, and they were also users of crack cocaine, which we found out in court they would get from Arroyo. So on this particular day, they all lived in this same apartment complex, and the dispute that led to this brutal slaying appears to have been over a pack of cigarettes. Now, what we heard in court from Keitha's mother, who survived being shot in the stomach and stabbed in the back, she said that, her testimony and that of first responders and police officers, along with medical examiners, was really the highlight of the trial last week, and the state this week is still continuing to put on witnesses, and we will resume tomorrow morning. So Tandalyn Jackson told the jury that on this particular day, her cigarettes went missing. And she said that Tony had been the only person other than her daughter who had been in her apartment, and Rodney Spring as well, who possibly could have taken her cigarettes. And this woman was very passionate about her cigarettes. She said, there were certain, she testified that she would give Tony, whom she called the defendant, anything that he wanted. But when it came to her cigarettes, she never wanted to be without them. And she said to the jury, to some laughter, which you heard hardly any laughter in this particular trial, she said, "I just did not want anybody messing with my cigarettes." So she, at some point when she was at the apartment with her daughter and with Rodney, she wanted a cigarette and she could not find them, and she got very angry, and she went to his apartment, which was just a few doors down from hers, and accused him of taking the cigarettes. And he denied it. And she basically said to the jury that she told him never to go to her house again, that she felt like this had been a very bad betrayal, and she was pretty hot about it. And Miss Tandalyn Jackson she has some disabilities. She told the jury that she uses a wheelchair. Pictures of her apartment, which were, crime scene photographs shown in trial, showed that, she had a hospital bed and she used her living room as her place. Her place to rest and to sleep because it was, a lower level apartment, and it was convenient for her to get in and out with her wheelchair. So something happened between the time that Tandalyn Jackson left Tony Arroyo's apartment and went back to hers, because she testified that Arroyo went to her apartment later on, began banging on the door, and when her daughter Keitha opened it, she was shot in the forehead and 4 other times on her body. She was also stabbed, as was Tandalyn, who said she didn't realize she had also been shot until she was in the hospital. And she cried on the stand when she told the jury that she never had the chance to see her daughter after she had been killed. And this was a very, very gruesome photograph that was shown to the panel, to the jury, and to the gallery of Keitha Jackson, who had been shot in the forehead. And it was a very gruesome photograph because, a medical examiner testified that likely was the fatal blow, because she had brain matter coming out of her head. And it was just a horrible thing. I had never seen anything quite like that. Of course, we've seen horrible photographs of crime scenes in different trials that I've covered, but this particular wound was just, it was right there. It's really hard to describe because it was very, very gruesome. So 3 911 calls were made when this incident occurred, and this was about 11 o'clock at night. And one was from a neighbor, but the second one actually was from Tandalyn herself, who was crying and told 911 operators that the person who did it was Tony. She did not use a last name, but she did say it was Tony. And she told the jury that she left because it was a very long call. They played this in court, and it was about 20 minutes. And she told the court that she had seen on television that if someone who is hurt has called 911, just to leave the phone on, because she felt like if she left the phone on, they would be able to ping at least to see where it's at if she wasn't able to speak anymore. But she was shot in the stomach, and she was stabbed in the back on both. What it looked like was both of her shoulder blade areas. So she testified that she's also had a lot of medical issues, and she had to relearn how to do things like how to speak and how to walk again. Although she, like I said earlier, she was disabled and used a wheelchair, so it was difficult for her to get around to begin with. But she also said this was the second of 3 children that she has lost. And she's 59 years old now. And so it was a very emotional thing for her to get up on the witness stand and talk about that, especially after witnessing, what happened in that situation. So meanwhile, Arroyo fled the scene, and he ended up being arrested at his girlfriend's apartment a few days later after a standoff with police in which he told them that he would blow his brains out unless they allowed him to talk to his mother. So he ended up getting arrested. And some of the things that occurred in court this week was we were able to watch his videotaped interview with San Antonio police detectives. And he denied involvement because he said that he had a genuine affection for Keitha and her mother. And he referred to Rodney Spring as Unc, short for uncle, because he told investigators that Rodney Spring was an uncle of one of his best friends. So there was definitely a familiarity between these 3 folks. So it's gone. The trial lasted the entire week. It began on Monday, and we did not convene on Friday. But it's gone a little slower than usual for different circumstances.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I know there was a temporary stop for a medical reason, which is interesting because we've also recently talked about a different death penalty case that had a similar yet very different occurrence.
Yes, this was something that occurred. They were listening to testimony. The jurors were during the capital murder trial of Mr. Arroyo, when a juror had a seizure while listening to testimony from a doctor who was able to assist, and trial actually had to be recessed for that day because the juror had to go and get medical attention and to be cleared actually to return to court. Because as you know, anyone who's ever sat on a jury, and especially in a murder trial, and in this case a capital murder trial, you start early in the morning, and you have a break in the morning, and then you have lunch, and then you have another break in the afternoon. And then many times judges will keep jurors until 5:30, maybe 6 o'clock, depending on what time they started during the day. And most of these cases will start at anywhere between 8:30 and 9 or 9:30 in the morning. So it was logical that the judge would recess so that the juror could get some medical attention. So yeah, but what are the chances that something that serious occurs right in front of a doctor? So that was a very lucky thing on the part of the juror, which seizures can be a very scary thing.
You're listening to The Docket, a new weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by our sponsor, the law offices of Pat Maloney. But unlike, I believe it was the case of Brian Flores, which turned into a mistrial over their medical issue, this was just a temporary stop of the trial that we're talking about now, correct?
Yes, yeah. And with Brian Flores, that case, they were still in what they call the voir dire part of the trial itself. And voir dire basically is the fancy term that lawyers use for jury selection. And so what happened in the Brian Flores case, now Brian Flores, to remind everyone, he's accused of killing 2 teenagers for someone else, allegedly over a sex tape that really ended up being a picture of a woman with another man who was not her boyfriend. And likely that was one of the victims in this murder case. But in that particular case, the Flores case hit a snag because his lead defense attorney fell and hit his head and suffered a concussion, which delayed selection. He was out for a couple of weeks. And, in these capital murder cases where they seek the death penalty, it takes a little longer than a day or a half a day to choose a jury. And in this particular case for Brian Flores, that jury selection or voir dire did not get a chance to continue because the judge declared a mistrial before, I believe maybe they had seated about 4, and you need 12 jurors and at least 2 alternates in case something happens to some of those jurors.
Yeah, that's something that we recently talked about really in depth was how you choose a jury for a capital murder case. How did that go for this specific case involving Luis Antonio Arroyo?
Well, this one, it went pretty quickly, actually. 3 weeks is what I'm told. And that is pretty quick, considering that it took a month during the last capital murder trial that was completed in San Antonio, which was in 2015, when a Bexar County jury sentenced Mark Anthony Gonzalez to death row in the horrific killing of Kenneth Van, who was a Bexar County sheriff's sergeant. He was shot at 46 times from a vehicle driven by Mark Gonzalez, who was right next to him as they were at a stoplight. And 26 of those bullets hit Sergeant Van. so horrifically that the officer was nearly decapitated. That particular case for the Gonzalez capital murder trial, it took a month to seat jurors. So 3 weeks actually for Tony Arroyo is pretty quick.
And then, Elizabeth, we do have several minutes left. I think we have time now for an update on Mark Benavides.
Yes, he was in court again in Bexar County late Friday afternoon. Visiting Judge Dick Alcala had a hearing a couple of weeks ago in which attorneys for Mark Benavides were withdrawing from the case. Now, to remind folks, Mark Benavides was a San Antonio attorney who represented clients mostly with charges that were related to prostitution or drugs. And he was convicted in April of continuous trafficking of persons for forcing his clients to have sex with him to keep them out of jail. He would pick them up and take them to a motel not very far from the Bexar County Justice Center in downtown San Antonio and videotape sexual encounters with them. And then he would take them to court to appear before a judge, or testimony from his Wilson County trial in late March and April. Witnesses said that they would sometimes appear before a judge and then go to the motel and have sex, and then Mark Benavides would take them home. So the new update in this case is that there was another continuous trafficking of persons charge that was indicted against Benavides about a month before his trial began. So that means that after his conviction in April, he now has 4 cases pending, that involve sex crimes related to his clients. But since that case came up right before trial started, it did not get handled the way the other ones did. The other cases were attached to Wilson County in a change of venue from Bexar County. And at that time, the defense, attorneys for Benavides, wanted the change of venue because some of the accusations from Benavides's accusers involve sexual encounters in jury rooms and in witness rooms in some of the courts in the Cadena Reeves Justice Center. Now, the Cadena Reeves Justice Center is where all of the criminal cases are heard in Bexar County. So when we had a hearing Friday on this new case, for this time a motion from the state to change the venue, we heard from prosecutors who said that they feel that in this new case that they're going to pursue next, that they would feel like any potential juror, whether they were walking down the hallway to go to the restroom or they were, walking down any hallway in that justice center, they would feel like, they could feel like they were in the proximity of a crime scene, because all of these rooms, these courtrooms and the rooms where jurors convene, they become a jury room during the trial. But once the jurors actually get the case, those rooms become deliberating rooms because everything that happens in there is secret. So all of these rooms are configured very similarly. And the fear, or the concern rather, from prosecutors is that jurors might do their own investigating in the case and not really, they're supposed to be concentrating on the evidence that's presented before them. So the big arguments between prosecutors and new defense attorneys that are representing Benavides moving forward said that, on one side, you have the state saying, the entire courthouse is potentially a crime scene. But then on the defense side, we have a defense attorney that is saying, judges admonish jurors all the time that they should only pay attention to the evidence that is presented in court. So we got to hear a lot of that, but I think Judge Alcala was of the opinion that maybe the new defense attorney had something when he suggested, isn't there any way that instead of having the trial in the main Justice Center, that it moved to a civil district court in the old historic Bexar County Courthouse. And they also have another courthouse, or a courtroom rather, that they use. It's in the basement of that facility that is called Impact Court. And it is a court that periodically is run in the Bexar County court system when the jail is overcrowded. So it's basically an extra courtroom. And there is a judge that runs that court that takes cases from each of the 10 state district courts and is able to hear them. But the only thing about that courtroom is that it's really small. And so Judge Alcala, at the end of this hearing, decided that he was not going to make a decision on a change of venue until he was able to investigate whether or not he could get another courtroom, and most importantly, whether he can get a courtroom in either the old courthouse or use Impact for 3 weeks. And that's going to be the thing, because the original two-phase trial that we had in late March and early April for Mark Benavides, which was held in Wilson County, lasted for 3 weeks. So it's a little bit of a scheduling issue, and it also appears to be a situation where this might actually be a little beneficial for the defense, because whereas the last time Alcala had a hearing regarding Mark Benavides, he had tentatively scheduled an October trial on this new continuous trafficking of persons case. But in this last hearing that happened late Friday, he decided he would not set a date for trial yet until we can get the change of venue situated. And then that also gives these new defense attorneys that the Benavides family has hired for Mark Benavides time to catch up on the cases.
But I'm sure no matter what time that case begins and anything else with Mark Benavides, we'll probably cover that here with an update on the docket, like we do every week now that we're back from our quick 1 week vacation. So Liz, great to have you back on the program. Look forward to speaking with you next week, and have a good 7 days until we talk again.
Thanks a lot, Chance. It's good to be back, but it was great to have a vacation. Take care.
And a big thank you to San Antonio Express News course reporter Elizabeth Zavala for joining me for today's episode of The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.